Friends, welcome to this last week. Let me call it the last week now, finally. The 15th day of our module. We are into module 2. We have with us Dr. Y.S.R. Murthy, a very close friend of ours, who is presently working as the professor and registrar at the Jindal Global University in Delhi. He also serves as the executive director of the Center for Human Rights Studies of the university. And prior to all this, he worked for 12 long years in the National Human Rights Commission in various capacities, including finally as the director, policy research programs and project division. I know him when he was the personal secretary to various chairpersons. And in that capacity, we used to meet in various meetings. Wherever he had to travel with the commissioners. And that was occasions when we met him. He spearheaded the NHRC's advocacy and monitoring efforts, among others, in the areas of public health, HIV and AIDS, and rights of persons with disabilities. As a civil servant, he also held a number of responsible and sensitive assignments, including as a director, media and communications in the Prime Minister's office, in the President's Secretariat, and the Cabinet Secretariat from 2005 to 2007. Another person was contributed to the Halsbury's Laws of India Human Rights and Human Rights Handbook, published by Lexis Butterworth. While in the NHRC, for several years, he edited its annual journal on human rights, which you should all access, and I'm sure today there will be some reference. He holds some bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Madras, a degree in human rights from the University of London, and his PhD from the Dr. Ambedkar Law University, Chennai. He, in addition to all this, is also an advisor to the All India Network of Individuals and NGOs working with national and state human rights institutions, as I mentioned. He works also, he is presently the Vice President of the Indian Society of International Law for a 3-year term and the Executive Council of the All India Law Teachers Congress. He is also a board member, executive board member of the International Forum on Crime and Criminal Law in the Global Era India. He is also a national coordinator of Swayam Muks. Friends, besides all this, a person who has passionately stood with us in all our engagements with national human rights institutions the moment he left the NHRC. He publicly identified with us, and of course, I'm sure also lost several things because he identified with us. There could be, in this world, people are paid for standing with something else. Mr. Y.S.R. Murthy stood where the truth lies, and that was our strength of our own clarity in many matters related to National Human Rights Commission. I'm therefore happy to welcome a close friend to all of you today for this session. I'm sure Sir Rajvel has spoken to you. You can take the breaks wherever you want, take questions, and once again get back to the session. Thank you, sir. Over to you, Mr.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I want to compliment IHRE in organizing this 3-week online course on human rights at a time when human rights are endangered, at a time when human rights defenders are under attack, at a time when there are many serious human rights challenges facing all of us. Now let's take up the Protection of Human Rights Act. It was enacted in the year 1993. And the objective was to create National Human Rights Commission, State Human Rights Commissions in states, and human rights courts for quote unquote better protection of human rights. Now, let's look at NHRC itself. It was established in 1993. It has now about to complete 27 years of its existence. It's headed by a former Chief Justice of India. The chairperson and members are appointed by a high-level committee headed by none less than the Prime Minister of India, and it has the powers of a civil court in order to discharge various responsibilities assigned to it under Section 12 of the Protection of Human Rights Act. It has a very wide mandate. Now, it has a core groups, it has a independent investigation wing attached to it. It has a special rapporteur, special representatives. It can visit prisons, police lockups, mental hospitals without prior notice or intimation. It can summon any official. And so this is a, so before we go further, we need to appreciate that the lawmakers have created a body for better protection of human rights. Now, let us look at, I have shared a detailed PowerPoint with you, and I do not intend going over the slides, and I hope you have seen them. The NHRC has a big role. It is supposed to be a catalyst, supposed to facilitate good and humane governance. It is supposed to monitor human rights. It's supposed to do many things under the Protection of Human Rights Act. Now, let us come to what are the major issues with the Protection of Human Rights Act. The Sigmund Freud said, anatomy is destiny. For instance, when the act was created, we need to really consider the historical context in which this act was prepared. That time there was criticism about India's human rights record, and so there was an attempt to create a body which will address the criticism of human rights violations in Jammu and Kashmir, Northeast, Andhra Pradesh, and other places. But while preparing the act, there were some structural flaws which were left there. For instance, the Human Rights Commission would investigate violations committed by, let's say, police personnel and other public servants. But on the other hand, there's a restricted procedure with regard to violations committed by armed forces personnel. NHRC would at best call for a report from the concerned authorities with regard to human rights violations committed by armed forces personnel. Now, see, why should there be, the moment you define human rights as right to life, liberty, dignity, equality, and also create a body for better protection, why should the lawmakers in the same very statute provide an opt-out for human rights violations committed by armed forces personnel? In fact, this is not the only structural flaw. There are many other flaws. As I go with the presentation, I will point out each of those violations, each of those structural flaws. First, in fact, Army is a great institution. It has been protecting the borders of our country in times of natural disasters, in times of other disasters. It has been helping the country, but human rights violation, is a human rights violation. It needs to be investigated impartially. It needs to be the victims of the human rights violations need to be provided compensation, restitution, etc. Now, a body like NHRC ought to have sufficient powers to handle violations committed by persons from armed forces. In fact, in the early years of the commission, there was a high-level body created, headed by a former Chief Justice of India, Justice Ahmadi, who suggested, a series of amendments. The NHRC, on its own, also made serious recommendations for the amendment of the Protection of Human Rights Act. But in the 2006, a few amendments were carried out by the government of India, which are like, the commission could provide immediate interim relief. It could visit police lockups. It could visit prisons without a prior invitation, and a few such other amendments. But the major amendments suggested by the commission were not taken forward. And the same way, in the 2019, in the month of July, a bill was introduced for the amendment of the Protection of Human Rights Act, again under the pressure from the Global Alliance of NHRIs, where the NHRIs, the Commission's application was pending for reaccreditation, and in the name of greater compliance with Paris principles, a few amendments were carried out. And these are, again, very inconsequential amendments. On paper, there is, for example, by co-opting the chairpersons of the few sister commissions, like the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, the National Commission for Backward Classes, the Office of the Chief Commissioner for Persons with Disabilities. There was an attempt made to show that pluralism is being achieved. But at the same time, the chairperson, who was supposed to be a former Chief Justice of India, there has been an amendment to that, saying that it could be either be a former Chief Justice of India or a judge of the Supreme Court of India. The tenure of the chairperson and members has been reduced from 5 years to 3 years. So there are many, a few other inconsequential amendments regarding Secretary General. Here again, a very important opportunity to amend the Act in order to build an effective, robust, strong Human Rights Commission has been frittered away. So for many of the, in fact, there are great public expectations attached to this organization. In the Constitution of India, the fundamental rights, directive principles have been enshrined, and the courts also have been given powers as custodians of these rights. And so we are talking about very important, serious, burning issues, and a specialized body that has been created for better protection of human rights. Now, let me turn to the one other area. For example, annual report. The NHRC, under Section 20 of the Protection of Human Rights Act, is supposed to submit an annual report to the government, and the government is expected to lay it on the table of the Parliament with an action taken report, and also give reasons for non-acceptance of recommendations, if any. Now, if you look at the, so this provision is a very interesting provision. Basically, it seeks to hold the executive accountable, and by the expectation is that the action taken reports are discussed in the legislature, in the Parliament, and then there's a debate on the non-acceptance of the recommendations. In fact, if you look at action taken reports over the years, these are in fact, the ATR is a misnomer. These are action not taken reports, and in fact, the government keeps saying that, we are not the body, the state governments are responsible, and then they keep saying, look, give reasons why certain recommendation cannot be implemented. So these are more exercises in obfuscation or exercise in evasion, rather than a genuine attempt to protect and promote human rights. So, and then if you look at the NHRC's own website, the reports up to the year 2017-18 have been uploaded. What about the annual report for 18-19? What about the annual report for 19-20? So there's a huge delays, and there are many other serious issues in connection with the submission of annual reports. There's another interesting provision in the Protection of Human Rights Act, whereby the Commission could also submit special reports, but this provision has been rarely utilized. For instance, right now, there is a COVID pandemic. There are serious human rights violations in the wake of COVID pandemic. There is a excessive use of force by the law enforcement personnel, violation of the migrant rights, violation of right to health. There are many other issues. So even while the pandemic rages, it has been used as a cover for carrying out many other violations. So here is an opportunity where the UN itself, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights itself, has expressed concern about the need for protection of human rights in the context of the pandemic. So here is an excellent opportunity for NHRC to be a catalyst to engage with the agencies of the Government of India. In fact, if you look at on 15th of April, barely 2 or 3 weeks into the lockdown, the NHRC made a recommendation to the Ministry of Home Affairs to incorporate, I mean, like even while issuing lockdown guidelines, please ensure that these guidelines do not violate right to life, liberty, and dignity of the individual. But you do not see any follow-up action thereon. What is the point of issuing a recommendation if you cannot follow through it? If because the public confidence in an institution is extremely important. Even for the executive, in order to have your recommendations implemented time and again, you need to be a strong, effective body which can follow through your recommendation, which can ensure that your recommendations are implemented in practice. So there is a lot of public expectations attached to the Human Rights Commission, but one finds in practice that there is a big gap in the fulfillment of those public expectations. In fact, all NHRIs are supposed to comply with the Paris Principles, which were adopted in the year 1991 by the UN General Assembly. Now, you look at these Paris Principles, they talk about autonomy from government, functional autonomy, financial autonomy. But does it happen in practice? Has the Commission taken truly an autonomous stand? Its independence is guaranteed in the statute. Yet, how many cases has it really taken an independent stand? Now, pluralism is one of the key principles in the Paris Principles. Now, when the amendments were carried out in the year 2019 in haste, for instance, in the first week of July, a bill was introduced, and in the second week, without debate, without much this thing, Lok Sabha passes it, and then a week later, Rajya Sabha passes it. There's no reference to the select committee. There's no other thing, and those amendments are carried out in a hurry. And one of the amendments is about, earlier on, 2 members were supposed to be there with who had a expert knowledge in human rights. So these 2 members have been made into 3, out of whom at least 1 should be woman. In other words, there are supposed to be 6 key members of the Human Rights Commission, of whom there shall be at least 1 woman. Women hold half the sky. And when you make a provision for only 1 woman member of the total 6 full-time members of the Commission, do you do adequate justice to the gender issues? Do you adequate justice to the principle of pluralism. Now, in the pretext of compliance with Paris principles, the government has co-opted the chairpersons of the National Commission for Backward Classes, National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, and the Office of the Chief Commissioner for Persons with Disability as a deemed members. So in other words, there are 7 deemed members. On paper, wonderful. These are very important commission in addition to National Commission for Women, Minorities, SC and ST. So there are 7 deemed members. But in practice, how often are those meetings held? For instance, the Parliament passes the Act amendment in July 2019. And when does the meeting happen of this statutory full commission? And what kind of, it happens nearly in the month of January. So what kind of coordination is there? One would have, liked the National Human Rights Commission to provide an overarching umbrella and coordinate with the various sister commission. And if you look at really the national state ones, there are nearly 170 institutions which are in the task of protection and promotion of human rights. And there's a lot they can do to pull together, to work in tandem, and to protect and promote human rights across the length and breadth of the country. Here is where the leadership of the commission, leadership of the NHRC is paramount. And what we see in practice is that these mechanisms, though they have been created by the statute, are not fully utilized. For instance, let's say NHRC has the powers of a civil court. It can ask for any document. It can ask for any public record. It can record evidence. It can summon officials. How often has it summoned senior officials like a chief secretary or a director general of police? How often has it utilized this summoning power and in order for better compliance with its own recommendations? So these are some important issues. There is a poor coordination with the sister commissions. I am individual complaints of human rights violations is an extremely critical matter, where an individual who has been wronged, who is seeking succor, and here again, the complaints handling of the commission is in a poor shape, and a lot more can be done. I'm not going into the detail of the complaints handling, as Mr. Parashar is scheduled to talk more detail on the complaints handling. Let's look at guidelines. NHRC once in a while issues guidelines from time to time as a recommendatory body. It has issued guidelines on custodial deaths. It has issued guidelines on fake encounters. It has issued guidelines on bonded labor, child labor, mental health, many other matters. But are those guidelines being implemented in practice? You look at Manipur. There was a conflict which went on for several decades, and armed forces were called in to support the civil administration in order to handle the violations, in order to handle the conflict situation. Armed Forces Special Powers Act was used, and a lot of innocent civilians without no criminal record whatsoever were eliminated in extrajudicial executions. There were more than 1,500 such cases. And here again, you all are aware of the extraordinary fast undertaken by Iram Sharmila. Here is one classic case. First of all, NHRC guidelines on fake encounters require registration of an FIR and investigation by an independent police station. All those have not been implemented at all. No FIR was registered, no investigation took place, and with the result that the victims whose kith and kin were killed had absolutely no remedy at all. In fact, many commissions of inquiry constituted by High Court, Guwahati High Court, many judicial commissions of inquiry, NHRC investigations, Santosh Hegde Commission have all pointed out how the fake encounters were really fake and what needed to be done. Right now, this entire issue is going on. And in this context, NHRC, in its affidavit, pleaded that it was understaffed, it didn't have adequate investigation powers, it didn't have adequate investigative staff, and the Supreme Court made an observation that it would not be out of place to believe that NHRC is a toothless tiger. Now, in the initial years of the commission, there were chairpersons who used the entire range of powers given to the commission in a very creative manner, in a very expansive manner, and intervened very effectively in the case of Gujarat riots, or when it came to protection of Chakma Hajang refugees in Arunachal Pradesh, and many other matters. But today, one doesn't see those many interventions in pending court proceedings. This is what is expected. NHRC's role is that of a watchdog. A watchdog is not supposed to keep quiet or silent when faced with serious human rights violations. It is supposed to bare its teeth, it's supposed to bark, it's supposed to make nuisance, it's supposed to shake others into action. And when it does not, it is for the civil society, it is for the enlightened public, it is for others to shake it into action, to shake it of its lethargy, to remind it of its own mandate, to remind it of its the vision of the lawmakers. In fact, there are many other serious issues. For instance, wrong appointments is an important problem. Oftentimes you find politically inspired appointments, people who had no real expertise, no real background work in human rights, often get appointed to these high positions. Even in the sister commissions, for instance, they do not comply with Paris principles. So there are so one needs to do a lot of advocacy in order to see that genuine people get appointed to the highest positions in these commissions, and these commissions are very critical to the protection and promotion of human rights. I can say a lot more things, but I have already shared a detailed PowerPoint with you, and I hope you have gone through it. And I'm now, I'm conscious of the time, so I am just going to stop here and take questions if you have any in the next 15 minutes.
Matthew?
Hello?
Yes, Henry. Yes.
Please question.
Sir, there are two questions at the moment.
Yeah.
Does the recent amendments in the NHRC have any effect on its autonomous status?
Okay.
And the second question is, how can NHRC become financially autonomous?
Okay. See, autonomy is a very, very complex question. See, autonomy is in the context of a culture of autonomy where the government agency respect that here is an autonomous institution where they should not what you call influence it, or at the second level it is for the institution also to assert its own distance from the government. In fact, NHRC is supposed to be a bridge between government on the one hand and the civil society on the other. Now, if you look at the recent amendments, the chairperson status has been reduced from that of a Chief Justice of India, former Chief Justice of India. So any judge of the Supreme Court can also be a chairperson of the commission. Second, the tenure has been reduced from 5 to 3 years. Now, the members can go for one more term of 3 years. Now, what happens? There are a few safeguards which are provided within the statute. For instance, their salary, their conditions of service cannot be reduced while they are serving NHRC. So that way, they can, on paper, take any independent stand, be it on any issue, which could be different from the government. But you don't find that happening in practice. For instance, recently there had been several challenges in the last year and this year. For instance, in the terms of hate crimes, in terms of mob lynching, in times of human rights violations in J&K, in terms of many other migrant rights. So there are many opportunities for the commission to take a independent stand. But as I said before, autonomy requires two players, one at the level of the institution which enjoys autonomy, and at the second at the level of other players in the government of India. Now, both sides are to respect autonomy in the interests of the human rights of the general public. And as regards financial autonomy, the parliament votes grants year after year, and the Human Rights Commission could spend the money as it deems fit for the purposes for which it has been established. So it has a functional financial autonomy. Only in 3-4 matters it doesn't really enjoy autonomy. For instance, it cannot increase staff. For example, let's say today there are serious challenges, and one day it finds that a staff of 300 will not do, but it requires, let's say, 400, including investigators. It cannot on its own do it without the approval of the Government of India. Similarly, it cannot buy vehicles on its own. There are a few issues there, but barring that, by and large, it has financial autonomy. But again, everything depends on the institution, that is NHRC, asserting the full range of functional autonomy, financial autonomy, and it requires a strong leadership to assert. It requires, for example, before TN session, the Election Commission was there, the laws were there, but it took a session to assert the autonomy of the Election Commission. He read the provisions, he understood the provision, he asserted the provisions, and that's where the key lies.
Thank you, sir. We have one more question now. Whether the recommendations of the NHRC to the state are advisory in nature or binding in nature?
They are, see, NHRC by its, as it is constituted under the Protection of Human Rights Act, is a recommendatory body. It cannot issue binding recommendations, but if faced with non-compliance by state governments, NHRC could move the High Court or the Supreme Court for enforcement of the recommendations. But you know what happens? A few instances it was done, but one wishes that more such cases are there, and so basically it's a recommendatory body.
One of the participant is asking if there's an example where they've used this particular provision, where they've gone to the court to ensure state comply with the recommendation.
Yeah, I will come to an instance from Tamil Nadu. There was an advocate, Ramdas, who was slapped by a policeman, and his case came to the commission about some 10, 12 years back. And the commission, after doing a fact finding, recommended a compensation of 5,000 rupees for the violation suffered by this advocate. And the state government took it as a prestige issue and said, gave a lot of reasons for not accepting the recommendation. Eventually, the commission went to the Madras High Court, and the court ordered compensation along with interest. And there are many such instances where, let's say, Arunachal, Chekma, and Ajong refugees, where the commission made recommendation for protection of their life and property, and when the Arunachal government didn't comply, the commission took it to the Supreme Court of India, and Supreme Court of India gave binding directions. And Gujarat riots again, there was the relief and rehabilitation and many other aspects. There was a lack of action on the part of the state government. The commission took the matter to the Supreme Court of India, and so there are a few such examples where the commission was constrained to take a matter to the court of law for enforcement of its recommendations. But one does not see that in the last few years.
Thank you, sir. That was the question for this session.
Okay. Thank you. It's a pleasure interacting with you. If I have come out as a bit critical, please understand my anguish. I want a strong, robust, effective National Human Rights Commission that acts as a guardian angel for the rights of the common man, for the rights of every citizen of this country and non-citizen also. And so this is the anguish. So when you believe in human rights, when you believe they need to be protected and promoted, and when you believe that there are particular sections like minorities, women, children, SCs, STs, migrants, refugees, etc., and you feel that systemically the rights are violated, and so there is anguish that these bodies which have been created by the statute for better protection could be doing much more. So it doesn't mean that they have not done anything. They have been doing, but these National Human Rights Commission and State Human Rights Commissions can do a lot more.
Good. I hope you can hear me, sir.
I can hear you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this presentation.
Thank you.
I hope the participants would be able to they were exposed to Paris principles yesterday, and though they will try to weigh the NHRC and the other commissions now, particularly the NHRC after your presentation and the presentation that comes afterwards, in the light of the Paris principles. I think that is what we all want. We are all here. We have had some wonderful people. Sorry, sir.
No. What I meant to say is that, so on paper, it seems to be comply with the Paris principle, but in practice or in effect, the direction is on the reverse.
So I will leave the participants at this stage. Thank you, sir, for having been with us. Friends, you will later be exposed to the INI, the All India Network of Individuals, NGOs working with national and state human rights institutions. It will come in a session this later in the program, and I hope it's this evening. It is this evening actually, and Matthew would be sharing that. And we are privileged to have Dr. YSR Murthy as one of our advisors. and we can assure you that he is very knowledgeable on the subject, very balanced on the subject, and I think it would do well for the government of India to request a person like him with experience to serve on something to review the National Human Rights Commission today, in the pathetic state that it is in. I can say that in a responsible manner. We are all friends of the commission, whether we serve on committees or not. We are all friends of the commission because we know a commission is required for this country, but we are all asking for an effective commission. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Friends, I now have pleasure, without wasting time, to introduce the next speaker on this panel, Mr. Y.S.R. Murthy.
No.
Sorry, Mr. A.K. Parashar. Mr. A.K. Parashar is yes, he is there. Parashar ji, we never asked you for your age even on your birthday, so we will keep that as a big secret. But we will reveal certain other things at the moment. Friends, I have pleasure in
ये जा नहीं सकता यहाँ से.
Can I go ahead, Matthew?
We can't see your screen, Henry.
You can see? You cannot.
Yeah, we cannot. It's mixed between two. It's like.
Sorry. It seems it has been paused. I don't know. Now? Now?
Is the activity.
You see activity. You see what participants are not supposed to see. Now are you able to see?
No.
Not yet fully. It's stuck. It's stuck somewhere.
It is stuck somewhere. Okay, friends, I will send my detailed PowerPoint to you. I'm sorry at this. Now is it visible?
No, it's not. I think you can just introduce Parashar ji. We can circulate it.
Okay. Okay, friends. I have pleasure to introduce Mr. Parashar. Very interesting personal details, which is a good reflection point for many of us. Here is a resource person born in a family which migrated from a town in Pakistan after partition to Delhi. His family was witness to the brutal killings of some of the near and dears. And this perhaps has a big role to play in his views, in how he works, and how he associates with a variety of people and concerns wherever he is. And I'm not talking about only matters related to human rights, but a number of other issues. This is he's a commerce graduate, a Bachelor of General Law from Kurukshetra University, a postgraduate in Diploma in Human Rights, International Humanitarian Refugee Law, postgraduate diploma, graduate diploma in Disaster Preparedness and Rehabilitation, etc. Now, he has worked in the Supreme Court of India since May 1980 to October 1992. Prior to coming to the NHRC, worked with several judges like Justice Venkata Ramaya, Justice Raghunath Mishra, Justice Venkatachalaya, etc., all of whom landed up being the Chief Justices of the Supreme Court of India. Thereafter, worked as an Assistant Registrar in the National Consumer Disputes Redressal Commission of India. Then a Special Assistant to the Chairperson of the National Human Rights Commission of India from 93 to 96. And then held various positions within the Commission, retiring finally as a Joint Registrar in April 2016. He was the focal point for human rights defenders in the NHRC, the first focal point when it was established in October 2010 and lasted till 2016. Contributed to several books, traveled extremely widely, attended various meetings of the Asia Pacific Forum of National Human Rights Institutions, about which you will come to know more today. He was in the founding meeting of that forum, attended meetings of the Commission on Human Rights, the Human Rights Council, and meetings of the former International Coordination Committee of National Human Rights Institutions, now known as the Global Alliance, meetings held in Geneva and elsewhere. Has also attended several trainings, meetings, workshops of the Asia Pacific Forum of National Human Rights Institutions. Recipient of several awards, recipient of the first Justice Ranganath Mishra Award on Human Rights, of the Karamveer Award promoted by the Karamveer Puraskar as the global awards given to recognize and applaud the social commitment of awardees for their proactive and voluntary work, etc., and the recipient of the Justice V.R. Krishna Iyer Centenary Award. More than all this, a passionate human rights worker, as I would like to call him, and who associates himself as closely as possible with the Human Rights Defenders Alert India, with which we are all associated. Since he was the Joint Registrar of the NHRC, he retired as the Joint Registrar of the NHRC, and had worked for several years within the NHRC in complaints handling. We thought it will be nice to invite Sir to handle the complaints handling part of the National Human Rights Commission, so that the whole presentation of the National Human Rights Commission will then be complete. Welcome, Parasharaji.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you. Can I start now?
Yes, sir. Satya, if you can start his presentation, please.
At the outset, I would like to thank IHRA for providing me an opportunity to interact with the participants of 21 days certificate course on human rights. Next. I've been, associated with the work of the National Human Rights Commission from its inception. Rather, I will say before before the NHRC was constituted. I had, as Mr. Henry has told you, that I worked with Justice Venkatramaya, who was one of the used to take keen interest in the field of human rights and responsible for a lot of books on the human rights. Now, here I would like to tell you that my work, Mr. Murthy has given a very, beautiful presentation on NHRC, its composition and its work, because me and Mr. Murthy, we both worked almost from the same time in the commission, that is since its inception. I would like to, please, next please.
Satya, next slide.
Has already informed to you that the NHRC is an accredited A status Global Alliance NHRI. This A status Global Alliance NHRI is given to the National Human Rights Institutions which comply with the Paris Principles and is reviewed after, I think, after 4 years. NHRC has the power to inquire into the individual complaints. The Commission has its own procedural regulations. These regulations are framed under Section 10 of the Act, and Initially, it was in 1994 and revised in 1997. The Commission follows procedures so far as inquiries are concerned under Section 17 of the PHRA Act 1993. It has all the powers of the civil court for purpose of inquiry. NHRC can also recommend interim relief, monitor implementation of recommendations. The Commission has a focal point for human rights defenders. The Commission can also can take support of investigation teams, special rapporteurs, etc., and also has been empowered to take the help of any investigating agencies like CBCID and CBI. Next, please.
Satya, next slide.
As already told you that the chairperson, the NHRC is headed by a chairperson and members. It has a Secretary General who is known as Chief Executive Officer for implementation of all the directions given by the Commission from time to time. The Commission is also assisted by the other divisions, including Law Division and Investigation Division, who are basically responsible for the complaints, handling of complaints for inquiry and investigation. Now, I'll confine myself to Law Division, which is mainly responsible for the scrutiny of complaints and all that. The Law Division is headed by an officer of the rank of higher judiciary, known as Registrar, Joint Registrar. It has 3 deputy registrars, around 10 assistant registrars, and has sections. All these sections, work distribution is by way of scrutiny branch. Scrutiny branch is responsible for all the complaints which are received in the Commission. Members branches, they are responsible for wherever the Commission takes cognizance, and the work is distributed here amongst chairmen and members, like M1, M2, M3, M4, M5, according to the seniority of the chair members. Then it has a full Commission branch and the DB, that is the divisional bench. This full Commission branch is responsible, I would like to tell you, for all the cases which are recommended by the members, and according to them, these are important, and these are transferred to the full Commission, and those are taken up in the full Commission meetings twice in a week. Now I would like to tell you that under the Act, the Commission has been mandated under Section 12A of the Act to inquire suo motu or on a petition presented by victims or any person on their behalf or on a direction or order of the court into complaints of violation of human rights or abatement thereof, negligence or direction of duties in the prevention of such violation by the public servants. Here I would like to tell you that the NHRC in the original Act, there was no power, or it was nothing was mentioned that the courts can transfer the cases to the Commission. This section was amended in 2006, where the words like a direction or order of the court were added. The other important function relates to the handling of complaints, where is important is that the Commission can intervene any proceeding in involving allegations of violation of human rights pending before the courts with the approval of the said court. These are, I would like to tell you, these are the most important sections which are dealing with the complaint handling. Now, as I mentioned to you earlier, that under Section 10 of the Act, the Commission have their own procedure regulations. Procedure regulations clearly state about the what sort of the complaint is. What sort of the complaint is? Complaints must be relating to the life, liberty, equality, and dignity. And these complaints should also be must be against any public servant. That is the most important thing, public servant. And these complaints are received, in the commission in a scrutiny branch, as I mentioned to you, are scrutinized. And after scrutiny, these are distributed equally amongst the chairman and members for orders. And during scrutiny, they note it, for preparation of a complaint, the most important thing for the scrutiny officers which they look into is that what is the date of the incident? What is the date of the, what is the place of the incident? What is the, who are the victims? And then these are the 2 or 3 very important, information which and what is the nature of the incident. These are some of the very important things there. And the regulations also, clearly mention that which are the complaints which are non-entertainable, ordinary non-entertainable by the commission, like if the matter is relating to the service matters, if the complaint is not addressed to the commission, if the complaint contains certain, allegations which are autonomous or synonymous in nature, are barred by section 36 or 36(2). The complaints can be sent to the commission by ordinary post or by post. Now, according to the Act, it can be sent by telegram also, which is not now in existence, and it can be sent by email or online. In the present circumstances, sending a complaint online is the best. I would like to tell you that it reaches the commission immediately in the present, when the COVID-19 is there. Now, I would like to tell you that under section 13 of the Act, the commission has been empowered to inquire cause inquiry into the matters and can call for the reports from the state government or from the authority against whom the allegations have been raised. It has all the powers of civil court, as I mentioned to earlier. In connection with any complaint registered in the commission, all the documents can be obtained. If for some reason these are not coming forth, the commission can summon and by enforcing the attendance of the officers. The commission can also call for the evidence on affidavit. And all these are, I would like to tell you that all these powers of the court are to help the commission in formation of their in the formation of their recommendations. For this purpose also, I would like to tell you that the commission has its own investigating staff. The commission investigation division, which is headed by an officer of the rank of Director General of Investigation. The commission under section 14 is empowered to utilize the services of any agency of central government or state government, like as I mentioned to you earlier, CBI or the CBCID. See, once the complaint is received in the commission, it is being given distinct number. It gives a distinct number and which can be followed by going to the website of the commission and till it is disposed of. Further, I would like to tell you that each and every complaint which is registered in the commission is placed before the commission. None of the officers of the commission has power to dispose them of. This is very important. I tell you that all these matters are scrutinized by an officers of the, some of them are of the rank of the, presenting officers who are normally retired district judges, and a bunch of, law officers who are there. They scrutinize it and place it before the commission. The most important thing I would like to tell you that the commission has suo moto power to take suo moto cognizance, where that means that it can take cognizance of any violation of human rights of its own. That could be based on the TV reports, newspaper reports, or any report which comes into the knowledge of the commission. Without waiting for the complaint, they can take suo moto cognizance. And here I would like to tell you the first case which was registered in the commission way back in 1993, it relates to Bej Behara case, which was the violation of which was a case of violation of human rights of the civilians by some security forces. As I also like to tell you that Mr. Murthy has already explained to you, under section 19 of the Act, there is a special provision relating to the handling of complaints where the allegations are against the armed forces. Here, the NHRC cannot inquire directly into these such complaints. They can, however, call for the report from the concerned, army or the security or the defense ministry or from the Ministry of Home Affairs. They can call for the reports, examine them, and make their recommendation. Next. Now, as I said, the commission has the power to recommend, compensation. On completion of the inquiry or during the inquiry also, the commission can recommend compensation. Here I would like to tell you that in 2006, this act was amended. Prior to 2006, the commission was empowered to, recommend compensation on completion of inquiry. But after the amendment, even during the pendency of the inquiry, the commission can recommend interim relief to the victims of violation of human rights. Intervention. Now, on the recommendations of the, I tell you the commission make recommendation for compensation, makes recommendation for, any interim relief, and they can even recommend for prosecution of such action against the guilty personnel under Section 18 of the 1993. Section 18 of the Act also provides time limit under which these recommendations are to be either accepted or rejected. Under Section 90, there is a slight difference between if in the civil cases, the recommendation, the time given by the statutory time given by 30 days or whatever time extended time given by the commission, and so far as matters pertaining to the army or defense personnel or security forces, it is 90 days. Whatever further extension given by the commission. The commission, before I go there, I would like to tell you that under Section 36(1) of the Act, the commission cannot take cognizance of the matters if it is pending in either State Human Rights Commission or any act under the Inquiries Act. The Commission is also barred to take action on complaints where they find that the incident is more than 1 year old. Here I would like to also inform you that the Commission in the earlier years, when started in 1993, received only 496 complaints. But now it receives complaints averaging around 90,000 every year. It is because of the credibility over the years the Commission has built up, the strong foundation laid by the Justice Ranganath Mishra ji, the strong jurisprudence laid by Justice Venkatachalaiah, and the courage shown for independent decisions and inquiries by Justice J.S. Verma. I would like to tell you that this is the type of confidence which was infused into the people of India by these first three chairpersons. In the earlier years, when it was constituted, the Commission was called Toothless Tiger. And some of the civil authorities also said that, civil societies also said that we will boycott this one. But the Commission showed its teeth by independently. I would like to give you one small example. As I said, the suo motu cognizance. The Commission under the Act has three positions, like the courts can refer the cases to the Commission. Number one, the Commission can intervene any proceeding which is there, which is pending in any court, and the issue involved is relating to the human rights. And the third one is the Commission can approach any court, Supreme Court or High Court, if any of its recommendation is not accepted by the state government or by the central government. The first intervention, as I remember, was a case relating to the dignity of women. 5 women were tattooed on their forehead, Jeb Khatri. The matter was reported in the media. The Commission took suo motu cognizance. In the meantime, a writ petition was moved by the civil society in the High Court of Punjab. The Commission, as I told you under Section 12B of the Act, has power to intervene. It was the first case and Commission decided to intervene into this matter. Application was moved, which was approved by the Supreme Court, by the High Court of Punjab and Haryana, in which the prayer was made that these are the victims of human rights violation, number one. Number two, their forehead maybe they may get the treatment from any doctor of their choice, and compensation be paid. I tell you, all the 3 recommendations were accepted by the court. Punjab and Haryana High Court, they recommended the rupees 1 lakh compensation was given to all the 5 victims. Victims were allowed to have surgery from the doctors of their choice, and also, but here I would like to tell you that here the Commission intervened only into the case of violation of human rights. What was the human right? That these 5 women were paraded in the market, tattooed before, which was not part of which is not the job of the police. This was the one case. Another case already, which falls under the category of under Section 18, that the commission can approach Supreme Court or High Court. Mr. Murthy has already explained to you about that case of, Chakma. And I would also like to now quote there was a complementary between the NHRC and the courts, Supreme Court and the courts. If all of you remember that in Punjab, there was a case, well-known case of Punjab mass cremation case, where thousands of bodies of people were disposed of by the Punjab police without following the procedural and regulations. In that case, the matter has gone to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court decided to transfer this case to the NHRC, keeping in view its credibility at that time. The central government objected to it on the ground that this case is covered under Section 36. The Supreme Court did not agree with the objections raised by the central government, and I would like to quote what the Supreme Court said at that relevant time. And in that case, I quote, the commission would function pursuant to the directions issued by this court and not under the act under which it is constituted. NHRC is given free hand and is not circumscribed by any conditions. Therefore, the jurisdiction exercised by the NHRC in these matters is of special nature, not covered by enactment or law, and thus act sui generis. This was the confidence of the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court reposed confidence in the NHRC. Apart from this case, I would like to tell you that at this relevant time, there was no mention, or there was under the act that the courts can transfer the cases to the NHRC. But like the starvation death case of Odisha, Odisha cyclone case, Agra, this mental institutions like Agra, Ranchi and all that, these cases were transferred by the Supreme Court to NHRC. Another important case which was referred by the Allahabad High Court was relating to the living dead. Thereafter, I would also like to tell you that there was a case of Charanjit Singh that was dealing with the case of mentally ill persons, where the commission intervened, because here the commission has taken cognizance first based on the media coverage. Some of the advocates from the High Court of Delhi filed a case in the High Court, and here also that was in 2005 or 2006 that the commission decided to intervene into the matter, and it has become all the suggestions and all that were accepted and are now followed by the prison administration also. The commission from time to time has also issued guidelines which are also treated as complaints. I would like to tell you that on 14th of December 1993, the commission has issued directions to all the SSPs, DMs, to report custodial deaths and custodial rapes. In 1996, it revised its 1995 revised its instructions that all the deaths should also be in the jail should also be reported. Although the encounter death cases were taken up by the NHRC from 1995 onwards, but the strong guidelines were issued only on 12th of May 2010. All these guidelines issued by the commission are being followed. I would not say scrupulously, but still the NHRC is getting intimations, and those intimations are examined by the investigation division of the commission. These are there, and further I would like to tell you that the commission till now has received, since inception, around 19 lakhs complaints, out of which they claim to have disposed of 18,85,769, and pendency is around 22,325, and a monetary relief of, I tell you, monetary relief of 183 crores in 6,891 cases have been, granted by the commission. The commission can be, reached for filing of the complaints. Can be reached on the details I have given in my, presentation. All the numbers of the focal point human rights defenders, the emergency numbers of the focal point human rights defenders, the email IDs, and also the toll-free number of the commission, 14433 is the number. Friends, here I would like to tell you that in the last few years, the position has changed, particularly after the amendments of the Act in 2019. And how it has changed, I would like to tell you that never ever earlier the Supreme Court or any other court has observed that the NHRC is a toothless tiger. Now see, in 1993, when it was constituted, civil society said it is a toothless tiger. But that with the same limited powers, same limited everything, the commission showed the truth and showed to the world that we can deliver. I would also like to tell you that all the recommendations in the complaint handling system which has been made, 99% complaint, 99% recommendations are accepted. There are reasons for that one, that the NHRC get a support from the courts, and their orders which were passed, proceedings which were passed, were really strong enough to bear the scrutiny of the courts. And but overall, now you can see in 2016, the commission chairman itself said that we are toothless and asked for some powers. Similarly, the this is observed by the Supreme Court also. Here, I would like to tell you that commission is dying under its own burden. As I said, 496, it has gone to around 90,000 complaints. But it has not been provided with the staff, experts, quality of the staff, or quantity of the staff which is required to handle such, complaints. So for quality of complaints, we need the quality staff and handling of complaints. This is there, but we should not get, but disturbed by that one. I would suggest that continue to send the complaints to the commission and test the possibility of getting all the reliefs. Friends, now I open to the questions which are there, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, Matthew.
Yeah. Thank you, Parashaji. The question here is, there are three questions. One is with regard to if the Human Rights Commission is not investigating a case properly or arrive at a wrong conclusion, which the petitioner may feel so, does the petitioner has a right to approach High Court or Supreme Court challenging a commission's order or finding?
the petitioner can has the right to approach the High Court earlier also. And I would like to tell you that the Commission is not passing any orders. It is purely a recommendatory body. And we can go to the court for procedural results and all that, but I don't think the Commission's recommendations can be challenged in the High Court or in the Supreme Court. Here, I would also like to tell you it is happening other way. When the Commission is recommending any making any recommendation, the affected parties, the public servants, are going to the court to stop the recommendations of the Commission.
Murthy, you want to say something?
Yeah. I want to supplement what my brother Parashar has said. See, when the Commission makes a recommendation about some compensation, it also says that it is without any prejudice to the rights of the petitioner to approach a court of law for a proper compensation. In fact, the petitioner is at liberty to move a civil court or other courts for appropriate remedy. What the Commission does is more immediate interim relief, and so at any stage, the petitioners has a right to move High Court or Supreme Court. That is not constrained under any law. So they can, people, if they're unhappy with the investigation carried out, if they're unhappy with an order passed, people in fact have gone. There had been cases where some people had taken NHRC recommendation to the court and contested it in the Supreme Court and other this thing. And it's possible. Somebody who is unhappy with an investigation or the order can move a court of law under the powers given under the Constitution of India.
Just to add on an example which is very current and all of you have been following this has been the Tuticorin firing, where two things have taken place. When the NHRC took suo motu notice and issued notice to the government of Tamil Nadu for reply within 8 weeks, there was an advocate in Delhi who immediately went to the Delhi High Court, and it is upon that intervention that the NHRC had to change and immediately appoint a 5-member team to go to Tuticorin. That was the first challenge. Now we are contemplating a second challenge now, where the NHRC has closed that complaint, and we are saying the process followed is not the process that is expected to be followed by a body like the NHRC with a qualitatively good investigation division, an investigation division which has come out with a report, and yet the report has not been made public and the complaint has been closed. So we are now going to challenge. We might do it in Delhi, we might do it in Tamil Nadu, that these are decisions to be made. But this is something that we announced on the 22nd May in the night at 10:30 when we finished the meeting as an end result of that meeting. So these are definitely possible. Yes, Matthew, to the next question.
Yes, thank you. Sir, when you spoke about suo motu cases, the participant who asked with regard to the Gujarat right cases, so they would like to know more about the actions taken by the Commission in the Gujarat right cases.
In the Gujarat right cases, if I recollect properly, the Commission has approached the Supreme Court also. If you remember, the case was known as Best Bakery case. Apart from that, in fact, that Best Bakery case has become the historic case, as far as I remember, because in this case, the retrial was ordered first time in the independent history of our country, and the trial was transferred to another state. Another victim of this Gujarat riot was Bilkis Bano. Everybody now knows that the Supreme Court has recently granted compensation to this also. I would also like to tell you that Bilkis Bano approached the Commission, and Justice Anand was there, who heard her patiently, and after that, I remember he spoke to Mr. Harish Salve, and requested him to provide her the legal aid. This was the case. That is how it was taken up in the Supreme Court, and the rest is history. How many public servants were, sentenced to, convicted and sentenced to different imprisonments and all that. Gujarat Roy cases was the case where the Justice Verma has taken a very strong proactive steps. I would like to tell you that very strong. In this case, the team of the commission has gone to collect all the documents also. I remember just one of the registrar of the commission, along with others, special rapporteur, Mr. Namudri was there. They all collected documents and all that and all that. This is how in the Gujarat Roy cases, the commission played the very proactive role and was able to deliver relief to the most of the people.
So the last question here is with regard to the open public hearings. So a participant who is in Chennai got to know about the open public hearing at Anna Sanitary Library, Chennai. So he has asked, what is this open hearings? So if you can tell more about open hearings, it will be helpful.
I tell you that these open hearings were recommended by Mr. Krishnan in one of the reports on SC/ST submitted to the commission sometime in 2003 or 4. And one of the recommendations in this report was that the NHRC should hold public hearings in different parts of the country. The first public hearing I remember was heard in 2012. It was in Puri, Odisha. The system followed in this is that a public notice is given calling for all the complaints relating to the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Those complaints are registered in the commission, reports are called, and a timing, the date is announced in the state that on such and such date, the commission will be coming to the state, and notice is given to all the accountable authorities and to the victim also to appear before it. It is, I tell you, one of the best practice adopted by the commission, and in the last 8 years, the commission has already covered the entire country, and second round has also begun. Here it is basically the matters relating to the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. I tell you my experience, the first experience of 2012 in the Puri, when a poor man was standing in the public hearing and stood up to say and has the courage to say, I would like to tell you that in presence of the SP who was present there, and tell the commission, sir, this is the man who refused to listen to me and who refused to take my complaint. Now you can imagine what empowerment has been given to the people, and there, after hearing, the relief was also given by way of registration of his FIR, and commission also directed why show cause notice as to why action we should not recommend action against you. This sort of proactiveness, this is going on now. This is the procedure we followed, and consequently a lot of awareness has come up, particularly related to the matters connected with scheduled caste and scheduled tribe.
Thank you, Henry. If you come in now.
Well, yes, I only wanted to say that as much as sometimes we get disillusioned, we should not get disillusioned. We need to continue, and we need to persevere, and we need to work in groups, work in cooperation with others, so that the successes of the past don't remain the successes of the past. But sometimes we need to jolt the institution a bit. Institutions sometimes get very settled. And if the corona had settled the National Human Rights Commission, I want to tell in public view today that we will jolt the institution and we will not hesitate to bolt the institution with a big lock bought from the Dindigul market. Dindigul is known for locks. This is what the country is angry about. The country is angry at the silence of the National Human Rights Commission over all the events that happened in the corona. We are all expressing our anger at the Supreme Court and some of the other high courts. But the National Human Rights Commission should have been the passionate mover behind this. Today's newspaper tells me, reads, the front page of today's newspaper reads, and it reads so well. It reads so well about the Chhattisgarh Chief Justice throws a lifeline to stranded students. Here was the Chief Justice who received a letter from a lawyer in Delhi and thereafter immediately moved. The email sent by the lawyer on May 17th to Chief Justice said the students were stranded in Raipur since March 20th. The story goes on. And he said the government reached him promptly by providing buses for the students. And he says, he has the gracefulness of saying, full credit goes to the Chhattisgarh government. He said the judiciary simply played its part of taking cognizance of a concerned citizens' representation. And he finishes saying, we, the judiciary, cannot simply direct the government to do anything unless there is a breach on the part of the government. So humbly this judge speaks. If only such small acts which both our resource persons today have seen in the past, have seen people talking over the phone, and both these gentlemen have spoken in turn over the phone to their chairpersons or senior officers there and ensured that protections were provided to several people at night, at the middle of night, people's cases were taken up seriously, etc. So I think we will continue to put that pressure. I'm a very hopeful human rights activist, as both of them are. And guided by good people, we will definitely make a move and ensure that institution continuously always belongs to you and me.
Henry, if I may say one word.
Yes, sir.
See, listen, sometime back there was a tweet on regard to the human rights violations in Kashmir about enforced disappearances, unmarked graves, mass blindings, children arrested, tortured, orphaned, widespread mental distress. Henry had given a tweet, I quote, it is time the NHRC, which prides itself of being a A-grade NHRI, immediately responds to these very serious allegations being made. What is the use of an NHRC with a former CJI leading it if it does not speak up independently at such occasions? And he has tagged a few others. I have responded to the tweet in the following words. I quote my own observation. It is high time NHRC makes a sincere effort to understand its own mandate, vision of the lawmakers, be sensitive to ground realities and response to them in a timely manner. Pay heed to the alerts of civil society. It is time to secure Sabka Viswas. This is my own tweet following Henry's tweet.
Thank you.
We have to bolt, we have to shake, we have to move them from complacency, and because the rights of the entire public are involved. These are very important and these are great institutions, but we need to fulfill the public expectations of these institutions.
Sure. Okay, now that it is time, friends, we are closing. I only want to remind you by WhatsApp, your details of your activity number 9 has been sent to you. Read it. I'll explain it this evening. Today evening, you will get into your new groups. By now, the WhatsApp intimation would have come to you that you all are moving into new groups. Which group you will belong to has been mentioned. It would have reached you. I'm sure Ganeshan and his team have ensured it. If it has not been done by now, it will be done in the next 3 minutes, 4 minutes. All the best. It is 36 and therefore we will close, but with our gratitude to our two speakers, Professor YSR Murthy and Mr. A.K. Parashar. Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you.
Thank you very much.